as little as a year ago, it was very hard to see your own hands in a virtual world. Now you can see your own hands. I was just, even last week, watching some of our videos of somebody opening a map in a virtual world, and you can see the full map in a virtual world.
Let's try to understand where the technology stands currently. What are the parts that have matured? Where do you see these headsets progressing as we go along? We've heard a lot of military XR stuff that's happening. So let's just hear from your side.
Yeah, so certainly in the flight world, and that's going to be my biggest use case or whatever is in the flight world or whatever. On the military side, I mean, you're starting to see them as dome augmentation, if not dome replacement, and that's a big deal, right? And it's because you can do these things. They're smaller footprint. They're easier to deploy. You can have them at the point of need. There's a lot of reasons for it, and you're not sacrificing anything on the visuals. There's still some barriers to get over, and we can talk about those if you want to. But as those things were overcome in the military side, the civilian world is only going to benefit from that because, as I like to say, we know where all the dead bodies lie, so we don't have to go down those paths and go refine those dead bodies. We already know that, hey, that doesn't work or this works better. And so the technology, just like everything in technology, gets smaller, lighter, more powerful. Maybe eventually where it's even more comfortable. And when I say that, I mean let's say you go to a wireless version of it or something like that. Now there's pros and cons to that, which we could talk about. But at the same time, that's the kind of evolution that's happening. And then of course just continual evolution of the visuals of what they can do, and then how you can do that. Initially, all this stuff was virtual reality, where everything you saw inside was going to be virtual. A lot of people started doing a mixed reality, it's really called VXR, where they could see something virtually, reach out to it, and then right behind it is something in the actual world. And then the evolution of that was now where you can cut out through the cameras that are on the front of the headset and see everything in the cockpit. You can see your hands, you can see everything that's inside the cockpit, and then it looks like a seamless picture to that.
And that dramatically enhances the training value of what is possible with the headset now?
Yeah, it does. I think because you can now, because again, back to the small footprint, lower cost, and easier to deploy and all that kind of stuff, you can just have more. And so the best ability these things have is availability, right? So if you can afford to bring a lot of these on, and in the Air Force, when we brought these on, in virtual reality, we had 60 of these at each base, at each UPT base, 60 trainers that you would never have to wait in line or go at 2 o'clock in the morning to get a sim slot, because they're always there and available. Now on the mixed reality side, it's a little harder to do that. The cost point's a little higher, but you still may have, say, 5 or 10 of these at a particular training center or base or whatever, to move it over to the civilian world. And that still gives you that availability, and you don't have to go down the road or somewhere else. It can be right there where your training center is, because you can put these things into a normal building with normal power and normal air conditioning and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to go to a building that was purpose-built for that. You can still have motion on them. If you go around the floor here, you can see how Brunner, one of our partners for Lufthansa Air Training Center, where they've incorporated their NovaSim base along with the rest of the solution, and it's just a real seamless integration of the whole thing.
So that's the other point I want to sort of get into, the use of these XR headsets for ab initio pilot training. They really would appear to have the ability to sort of change the way that training is undertaken?
Yeah, for sure. So when we introduced initially VR and then eventually mixed reality into Air Force pilot training, what we saw was people were cutting between 50 to 30% of time to solo. And we also saw that, for the skill sets, before we introduced virtual reality and then after we introduced virtual reality, for the first flight, students were better. 33 out of 40 of the maneuvers that we looked at, they were better at pretty much all of the maneuvers. And the other 7, they were as good. They weren't any worse. So you can understand that if you get those reps and sets before you ever have to go into the aircraft, same thing for ab initio. When I learned, the best thing that I had was a poster on the wall, right? And the biggest, when the very first poster I got that I put on the wall, it was black and white. And then the best innovation over the next, 10 years was to go to color, So that was like the evolution there. And so we had to close our eyes and pretend with a plunger in one hand and something else in the other hand, pretend like you had a stick and throttle, and just close your eyes, and then you look up and you do your checklist or whatever you're going to get out of that. Now you can do that, but you can do a lot more than that, right? Now you can do things with mixed reality that gives you the full switches, right? So now you can see everything inside. You can look inside quickly, get information you need, look back outside and see what visual information you need. And you can do things like emergency procedures, because you have all the full switches, knobs, dials, your circuit breakers, everything's there, and they're in actual reality, mixed in through the cameras with the virtual reality seamlessly in one big picture.
What discussions are you having with the training organizations, with the aircraft OEMs? How do you foresee these headsets progressing within the civilian community for ab initio training?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just partnered up this year with a company called Flight Path Aviation, and they're building a Cirrus, SR20, SR22. So again, back to the ab initio, that's the best use case for them right now. Things that have large canopies, learning basic skills and things like that. That's a really good fit for them right now. Maybe down the road they're going to get in the full flight sim arena, but right now, the ab initio, helicopters, eVTOL, that kind of thing. Something that's really visually stimulating that you need to actually do a lot of visual tasks are the perfect fit for these. Yeah.
From where you are, do you foresee having these headsets as an addition to their existing training fleet, where the pupils go through some initial training on the headset, they do less hours on the aircraft? There's a lot of demand for pilots, so do you see this as one of the ways in terms of meeting that need, being able to churn out a larger number of pilots to the system, because now you have something that delivers a really, what seems to be a high standard of training on its own?
Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly where we saw them, and that's exactly what we saw it in the Air Force as well when we introduced them. It was never to take away flight hours. It was not the intent. Our idea was to make the training better on the ground, so it was better first and then faster when able. In other words, if you can get through the training faster, you can get to that solo 30 or 50% faster. Just think about it. If you're starting at a higher point and then you have less regression in between your sorties, you're only going to get better faster, right? So that's the theory on that. And so now what you can do is the augmentation that you were talking about. You still have your sims, you still have your aircraft, and there's certain tasks, let's say like upset prevention and recovery training, that you're going to have a really hard time doing in a sim. You can do an okay job, but you're still sitting at 1G, right, on the ground. You're not going to feel the G's of the aircraft on that, but you can get that oh crap, kind of effect out of it because the visuals are so good. If you get this thing going on in a full canopied aircraft and you're not supposed to be turning upside down, you can see all that everywhere around you, and you kind of get that, oh crap, I need to do something here, or I'm going to stall the aircraft. So yeah, so I think they augment what you can do then in the full flight sims, or let's say even less than that, even an FTD level, more at the FAA versus the EASA, but but at the medium to low levels, you can do a lot of augmentation. The way we see these things being deployed is that for every big sim, every full flight sim or whatever, you'd have 4 or maybe 6 or 8 of these that you could go to. And again, the cost point and where you can put them is just a lot more reasonable for companies, OEMs.
Fantastic. TJ, one aspect I'd like you to focus on is Varjo's managed to remain, I'm sure, with a lot of effort, at the front end, if not the front of the contenders. What do you see coming out in terms of some enhancements, some technologies, anything that you can tell us about?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, that's exactly what attracted me to Varjo Technologies. Was as I saw in the industry, not only do they have the best headset when I was active duty, then also a company that I work for, we started integrating them, and it was the best experience with their headsets, and it just was it was just the way that we wanted to go. Was to go down that, and that just kind of attracted me to go to the company, and so that innovation. So, we've kind of taken on the people don't want to change their headsets every year, right? So we don't need to come up with a headset every single year. So we've come out with the XR4. We've just done a refresh on it. It's still the same XR4, it just a little bit ergonomically fits a little bit better. We just launched it last month, and that's been a huge thing. People just like the way it fits. It's more comfortable. There's some parts about it, like the cameras are angled down so that it's like pointing where you want the cameras angled, right by your hands. So that's like just minor things that we've done. But we expect to fill that well into the 2030s, because what we want to do beside that is to keep up with the software, right? To continually add features to it that people like to see. As little as a year ago, it was very hard to see your own hands in a virtual world. Now you can see your own hands. I was just even last week watching some of our videos of somebody opening a map in a virtual world, and you can see the full map in a virtual world because all the cameras that are on there, and they're tracking and it's doing what's called hand occlusion, although that can work for object occlusion as well. And now you can see real things in a virtual world, and then that you can combine with the masking you can do in mixed reality. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So most of the things we're working on, we're trying to continue to develop all those software features just to make the headsets more powerful. And so for the folks that decide to make the investment into this as their visual delivery system, they don't have to change their headset every year. They just have to keep up with the with our software, and then how to integrate that software and move forward. So a lot of the things we're working on, we have a night mode where you can just with the flick of a switch basically make it night inside your headset. And it's it's a great way because especially military training, you're doing a lot of that at night. But even with airliners or whatnot, you're going to do that at night, and that's a whole other realm. There's requirements for night flying, right? So that's the kind of stuff. So we have that, like I said, the hand occlusion, hand segmentation, as we previously called it. We're working on multi-GPU support so that you can have, so you have things, because one of the things, you're always fighting the frame rates, right? You always want to keep the frame rates as high as possible because that avoids, things like cyber sickness and just lag, latency, and all that. So you're always trying to make that better. So, trying to, have multiple GPUs producing, parts of the visual experience that you're experiencing. So that's a big one. We had a command line interface. So a lot of these sims, there's not like a sim operator that's helping you because these are like forward deployed. They're supposed to be like trainers that you can go to and just kind of get some training, where you can just sit down and do your own work on there. Well, that can be a little bit hard when you got a headset on, right? So now if you have like a really easy button where you just hit a button that says start sim, hit a button. So that command line interface just allows you to interact with it. You just write a script, press a button, and then that thing runs. Start scenario, whatever it happens to be. But just really cool stuff that you can do.
TJ, you're fairly well entrenched, I'd say very well entrenched in the military space.
Yeah.
How are you spreading the gospel, as it were, in the civil aviation community?
Right, yeah, so the way I see it, first of all, the military kind of led the way, right? And actually, I'll back that up just a little bit. Ironically, this actually started in the basements of, private pilots all over the world, developing and building their own sims. Somebody put on a VR headset and said, wow, I can do some pretty cool visuals in here. And that's really what was the genesis of that. The Air Force kind of saw that, and then the Air Force said, hey, I think we can do that for our brand new pilots, but let's do it at a little better scale, a little bit better quality, whatever, than the person in their basement can do, or whatever. And so that was just kind of that evolution. But now that the military's kind of paved that path, I see that going into the civilian world, and you see it already. I mean, I'm talking tomorrow, and I have a slide where I think there's at least 8 or 9 devices right now that have been certified, whether it's FAA or EASA certified, and that'll only get to be more as you go into like the eVTOL space. They haven't even written the standards. I serve on a board that helps to write those standards, to try and get those things out there to go. Those aircraft, they're not super expensive. They're also very automated, right? So it's a little bit different training experience than your old Cessna 172 or whatever that you used to have to train on. So you can't really just go to the old, what worked for the Cessna 172 may not work for the Archer Midnight or whatever it is that, aircraft that's out there. So I see that transition. It's really exciting because this was always it's kind of like when DARPA started the internet or whatever, and that was all military project, right, or GPS, and the long-term goal is to have a dual use for the civilian world, right? Well, I see that same for extended reality, where the military kind of led the way, but now, civilian world is benefiting from all those innovations and whatnot. And like I said, you don't have to go very far to see it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really exciting stuff.
Fantastic. TJ, thanks so much. I think it's been a very insightful conversation. So I look forward to having this conversation again at the next show that we get to meet.
Absolutely, yeah, I enjoyed it.
Time.
Yeah, so good to meet you.